Last time we were together, we talked through the beginning aspects of those choke points, if you will, that allow us to control what we're seeing, as well as talking through the terminology. I told you I didn't have a cheat sheet last week, and this morning I got in pretty late last night, pulled in about 11 to my house, and went to bed and got up this morning and went looking for that cheat sheet, and I didn't find it. I'm wondering if I made it on my laptop and I never got it transferred over to my shared folder, so I'll have to look for it this week. But we talked about hardware, and hardware are the physical components of the computer. When you have a computer that's accessing things that are distant, we would typically call that a terminal. So a terminal is accessing computer resources that are not localized to it. It is built to access resources somewhere else, and that would be effectively what we have with a computer screen and a browser. Is a terminal setup where we are accessing the resources of much larger, much faster, much bigger, much more powerful computers, and we are doing so through our browser. Of course, there are still things that many of us do locally on our computers. And that's done through wire, which we would often call Ethernet. There can also be there are other cables involved, but usually as far as the computer is concerned, it's plugging into an Ethernet port. And then there's Wi-Fi, which is the way that most of us would do those things at home through wireless with a Wi-Fi card in our devices. We also can talk about cellular and satellite, all right, which are the other two ways. Cellular being what we all have on our phones, and if you have a data connection on your phone, that's of course through the cellular network. And then satellite is becoming more popular now since Elon Musk and Starlink. What they're using in North Carolina right now to try to give some semblance of communication to those people that are struggling. And satellite has a tremendous number of advantages to where it's quite possible that both phone and data will become a satellite thing if the Lord tarries in the future. I think it will make a lot more sense and be a lot more viable as a general rule than the cell towers. Cell towers are starting to max out with the bandwidth limitations and everything within the spectrums of bands. So you had 3G, then you had 4G, then you had 5G, and with each one the FCC is opening new radio bands and the millimeter wave bands, and they're getting very, very, they're running out, they're sort of running out. A lot of things need those bands, right? Airlines need those bands, police need those bands. Lots of things need those bands. They're not necessarily running out, but they do become congested, and then they need to open up more bands. Different wireless carriers need to be on different bands. And with the newest stuff, millimeter wave, it's extremely fast, but basically line of sight. Like even if a piece of paper comes between you and the tower, it's done. So not looking to be the future. I think satellite's probably the future. So all of that's hardware. And then we talk about the software. Those are the things that we use on the hardware to access. And that's browsers, usually apps. There can be software firewalls and the like as well. So we talked through that. And when we get onto a terminal and we access the web through a browser or through an app or through whatever it might be, that is then sent through a router. And at home, you have access to that router, if not control of that router. There are still various companies who don't give you control over the router, but they will give you access, and those companies that don't give you control, you could always get a router before their router, disable their router, and just use theirs as a modem. So the router becomes a very, very important choke point. That is the point where anything in your home can be controlled. If you have control over your router, then you do have control over what comes in and out of your home, as long as you have a router that has what we called a firewall. And a firewall was a software application that runs on hardware, oftentimes on a router, can also run on an actual your actual device. I have a built-in firewall on my phone, and it also runs its own points through DNS service, and it runs all of that through a VPN and some filters and whatnot. So the router, oftentimes coupled with a firewall and a modem, anything that's in your home is going to go through there to get to your internet service provider, and because of that, you can check things there. Now, again, there are some ways around that. One of those ways is with, as I just mentioned, a VPN, which we said was a virtual private network. And what that does is on device, it reads and encrypts the data, and it sends that data encrypted so that the things that are between your device and the other end of that VPN, which is a VPN provider, cannot read what the data is. And because of that, it can go through your router, and your router says, I don't know what this is, so I'm just letting it through. I can't read it. I can't read anything about it, but I know its destination is okay because the destination is the server for the VPN, and that's not going to be pornography or gambling or social media. That's going to be your VPN. But then when it gets to the other side of that VPN, the VPN says, oh, this is a gambling site, and then it sends it on to the gambling site, and then it comes back to the VPN. They secure it again, they encrypt it, and then it goes through your router, and the router can't see what the traffic is. So the VPN is a generalized way to get around a router firewall combination. However, if you know, as far as protecting our children is concerned, if your children aren't, you can lock down your device so they can't install VPNs. And if they're not extremely tech savvy, then a device that does not have a VPN on it, you lock it down so it can't install a VPN. There are some ways to block VPN servers, but the problem is that they're changing their servers all the time because they're trying to get around a bunch of other sites blocking them. A lot of web streaming sites and such block VPN servers because they don't want a person in France watching an NFL game by just changing their VPN to say that they live in Georgia. And now NFL lets them watch the game because it's local to them when actually they're in France. That's how people get around geo barriers for things and such. VPNs are pretty important for that. So anyway, that's kind of, we talked a little bit about a VPN. VPNs are a way around a router, but as a general rule, parents, if you're able to lock down your router, at least until your children are extremely tech savvy, or as long as you lock down the ability for them to install, then they won't be able to install a VPN. The other thing which Eric had mentioned last time and I didn't actually address is he used the word proxy. There are some websites which are called proxies. And what they do is, let's say, just pull up an example here. Need to start being prepared to do more of this. See if this will work. Let me turn this off. That's not what I wanted to do. Just get connected to my phone here. So on legacybaptistchurch.net, on our sermon resources, you notice that everything's loaded except for this frame, and then that frame just popped in. This is actually, this is not code from Legacy Baptist Church. This is coded from sermonaudio.com. And what I do is I've got a frame here, and I put in a sermon audio web address, and it actually loads sermon audio, a certain web address of sermon audio inside my website. So that if I had blocked on my computer sermonaudio.net, if I typed in sermon audio, is it .net.com? I don't know what it is. .com. Sermonaudio.com. If I type in sermonaudio.com, my firewall is going to say, nope, can't go there. But if I type in legacybaptistchurch.net, I go there, and then it loads in a browser inside of it, sermonaudio.com. My firewall thinks I'm at legacybaptistchurch.net, but I'm actually looking at sermonaudio.com. And that's what we call a proxy. So there are proxy sites where you punch in the name of the proxy, and effectively what they do is they load just a tiny little banner, and then they load a open web page. And then you can go anywhere you want on the web in that web page, and your firewall thinks that you're on this is a safewebsite.com, but you're actually going anywhere else you want on the web. So that is something also that people do to get around censorship sort of things. And censorship we see is a bad word, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about censoring content for the sake of our own spiritual lives and the lives of our children. So proxies is something else that we have to look for. And once again, what we rely on generally for these things, and this is where paid service does come in, is paid services are scouring the web every day looking for new proxies, new VPN servers, new everything, and they're updating their lists every day with all of that new stuff to try to stay ahead of, they're never going to be ahead of them, right, the people that are making them. But what they want to be ahead of is the users finding out about the new servers and whatnot. So that's another danger. But as a general rule, and I do say this with all sincerity, as a general rule, as far as your home is concerned, if you have a router that's well configured with a good firewall, and you have it pointed to a good safe DNS server that's got that especially if between your hardware and your router, you can continually point to the right DNS server, and we'll talk about why that matters in a minute. If you can do that, then you're probably at 99.5% of protection in your home. And it's only the very uniquely technical person who will then go through the process of getting around that. And at that point, we'll again talk about the fact that at that point, you've got some, there's a lot more heart work that needs to be done than technical work, right? If you've got a child who is looking for that 5.5% window to see what they want to see online, then you don't need to spend your time scouring technical blogs for how to lock that down. You need to spend your time opening the Bible with your child and walking them through a relationship with Jesus Christ and how to find victory in their lives at that point. So we talked about the router. Are there any questions that were bouncing around in your mind? We talked about cookies a little bit last week as well and what they are. Any questions before we invest in new material this week on any of these things that we've talked about? Yes, William.
Probably a very basic question, but what does the DNS stand for?
Domain Name System. Yes, and again, I'm sorry, I wish I had that cheat sheet. And what the domain name system does is it is a registry of all the domain names, www.whatever.com, net, biz, and then the IP or Internet Protocol address that is connected. So that in almost every modern situation, there are a few apps that do it differently because they want to get around DNS services. But whatever internet service provider you have, when you send something to your router, legacybaptistchurch.net, and the router knows which computer it's from, and then the web address. So it comes to the router, and the router doesn't send it will send the IP address. Usually it'll send the IP address, not necessarily of the direct computer. It'll send actually the IP address of your modem. And it'll send the IP address of your modem, the web address that you want, to whatever service provider. They will then send it to a domain name system, the web address, and the IP. And it used to be that if you wanted to, you could actually browse the internet by IP address. So in my day when I was being a super geek, I'd be like, I don't need web addresses. I don't need google.com. I just memorize the actual IP numbers, and I'd go directly. Most systems won't allow you to do that anymore. They require the domain name to be paired with the IP address when it goes to the DNS or when it goes to and the server will oftentimes even reject you if you try to go directly to an IP address. You have to go through a DNS. And the reason why is because if you've ever heard of DDoS attacks, sometimes, when Elon Musk did his interview with Donald Trump, that there was the server was brought down for a little bit. And what happens there is what hackers will do when they want to try to destroy the ability for people to access a website is they'll do what's called a distributed denial of service attack. And usually it's Russian hackers or whatever. But what they'll do is they'll program dozens, hundreds of computers to what's called ping. So a ping is you send one packet to a server, And then that server, when it gets that packet, sends one packet back, and the packet is just one little bit of data, in order to prove that the server is alive, that there's an open connection there. Marco Polo, it's basically just Marco Polo, okay? So what they'll do is they'll have computers programmed, hundreds of computers, maybe even all around the world, thousands, to ping the server again and again and again and again and again. And so the server is so busy replying to every single one of these pings that it can't process anything else, and then the system crashes. And that's called a distributed denial of service attack. Well, DNS servers are a major line of defense for that. So when the DNS server sees requests from all of these places around the world and they look like suspicious requests, they start to lock them out. They don't send them to the final host. And that way, that final host doesn't crash. So DNS servers now have become such an integral part of protection of the web that most places, like I could not go to Amazon by their IP address. They will never accept a direct connection that's not through a DNS server, unless it's someone up on top and they've got their own VPN tunnels and whatnot. They will never accept random Joe Schmo just popping in their IP address and going directly to their site. It's not going to happen, because if they left that door open, then they'd get denial of service attacks all the time. So the big name in DNS servers is called Cloudflare. And Cloudflare offers a tremendous number of services to protect businesses as a middle wall of partition between people that want to access their site and their site so that they can maintain. So the DNS is very powerful. It's very integrated into the internet today. And that's why it's so useful for us when it comes to our ability to protect ourselves through it. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. So then we talk about the internet service provider. Nope, I'm going to go right over to here. The internet service provider is a company that provides internet access to individuals. They generally control the physical infrastructure, the lines, the servers. We don't often think of infrastructure when we think of cell phones, like the physical, because there's not lines, but there's still towers, right? They control the towers. They also have, they own your SIM card, right? Your SIM card is one through AT&T or Verizon or whoever it might be. You can't just reprogram that yourself. It's programmed to interact with their servers, with their towers, with their things. So while your device may not be from them, we've gotten a little bit further away from the idea that the internet service provider or the cell provider has strong customized devices. Though there are still some, yet the SIM card and of course the towers are still have to be in line. And this is why you can't necessarily always, it's changing now, but especially in the 3G days, you couldn't just take a phone from Verizon and take it to AT&T. Because not only did they use different bands that were not programmed into the modem, but they actually used an entirely different technology. So AT&T used a more open technology called GSM, and Verizon used a technology that was a little more stable, but not as fast, called CDMA. And they were absolutely incompatible. So because of that, you couldn't do that. Other phones, they would call them unlocked phones. It's what a lot of people will do today. All of Apple's phones have been this way for a long time now. And they can go to any carrier. They all have the same bands now. And that's because Verizon has switched over to the GSM protocol in the days of 4G. Now everyone is kind of on the same protocol, and they just have different bands within those protocols. So all of that is internet service provider. They also inspect the content and save various aspects of data. Different from internet provider to internet provider, but this is one of those areas where you don't think about, but the cell provider or your internet service provider, you think about, okay, I need to protect myself from Google, I need to protect myself from the spying eyes, Amazon, whatever it might be, but all of that data goes through your internet service provider. Every single phone call you make is logged. They're not necessarily listening in on the call, but they know what where it came from, how long the call was. They can triangulate your position through cell towers. Right? The idea of triangulation is if you have 3 points, and if something is within the scope of 3 points, then you can take those 3 points, draw direct lines, and you'll find the intersection. Cell towers, this is oftentimes what they do in criminal investigations. They want to prove that someone's been in an area. As long as his cell phone was on him, it's connected to multiple towers at any given moment. And that's so that you have seamless transition from space to space in communication. So if I'm going from here to there, I might be connected to 2 towers right here, but as I go that way, I lose 1 tower, but I'm still connected to the other, and then I pick up another so that I'm seamless. Well, if they've got 3 of those, then they can triangulate my position. If they have 1, then they know my general area, right? And so they can, through that process, know where I am at any given time. And of course, Google Maps does that. I don't know if you've ever, if you're logged into Google Maps on your phone and you've ever gone to see how they trace you from spot to spot to spot throughout the day. That's how they get the data to say, we're gonna, we know your schedule, so we're gonna automatically do these things in any given day and tell you what the traffic is, and what time you need to leave for work and all of these things. And it's because they don't just take note of where you go, they take note of how long you're there. This is also how they get traffic data. You wonder how you get those red and those yellow lines on Google Maps and how they're accurate? It's because there's 10 dozen phones connected to Google in that traffic that are telling Google, even if you're not actually on Google Maps at the time, we're stopped. And then we're starting, and then we're stopped, and then we're starting. And the phone says, that's stop and go traffic. And all of that sends back. Enough of those get sent back, and it creates a red mark on Google Maps. That's a traffic jam. And then it delineates the amount of space between them. ISPs know all of those things. So the ISP has a lot of this data. In theory, an ISP is a provider, meaning they should impartially move data throughout their infrastructure. In recent years, they've been more proactive in offering services such as filtering. So it's very possible that your internet service provider, whether that's home or even, I believe that there are some family filters on cell phone providers, although I've never looked much into them. That's one area where I'm a bit ignorant. But they could provide that. Once again, it would have the same problems as a router, which means if I turn on a VPN, my ISP no longer can see where I'm going. All they know is that I'm going from my phone to the VPN server, and everything is streaming from them to the VPN server. And then at the VPN server, that's where it's branching out to the rest of the internet. So they can't read anything if I have a VPN on. By the way, they can't read everything anyway. This is one of the big things. VPNs say, oh, get a VPN because your privacy. You don't want anyone, at a coffee shop. That's a bunch of bunk. Almost everything now is put through what's called HTTPS. It's the protocol for the internet, and the S at the end there means it's a secure layer. It's already encrypted. So most people cannot read the data anyway. But what a ISP can do if you don't have a VPN is they can see where it's going. They can read the www. They know which websites you're visiting because it's coming through them. So that's what a VPN does, is it keeps them from knowing what, they can't see the content, but they can still know which websites you're visiting if you are not using a VPN. And for most of us, that's just fine. It really doesn't matter. So that's the ISP. It is basically like a router of sorts that's remote, and it functions in order to deliver our things, should be agnostically, from our devices to the domain name system. Any questions on ISPs? Internet service providers, what that means. Okay, the next link in the chain is the domain name system. I already spent a little bit of time on this even today. The domain name system gets an IP address and a web address, the IP address that it's from, namely my computer, It might be to a cell tower or whatever it might be, ISPs, servers and such. And it takes that, and there are actually a lot of ISPs that run their own DNS services as well. And it will take that and it will what we call resolve it. So it'll say, okay, legacybaptistchurch.net, that connects to this internet service, internet protocol number. In this case, that would be a web address, and then it's all obscured here by my circles. But 89.187.180.45, yeah, I guess it's right there too. And then that is what is actually going to make sure it gets to the exact place it's supposed to get to online, and then it goes to that server where it reads the data from that, pulls that data, the server gets a request, says, I want this page, and then it sends that page back, and it goes through the whole thing again, bing, 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 and then you read that data. So when I went to legacybaptistchurch.net on my tablet just then, I typed it in a browser, legacybaptistchurch.net. It went through, in this case, well, it went through my phone because it's hotspotted. Then it went to the internet service provider's, effectively its router, through the network. And then that sent it to a DNS. And in my case, I've got it routing through a DNS that actually does have some filters. And then it says, okay, legacybaptistchurch.net is connected to this IP. And then it went to there, and then it pulled the home page, and then it drew it back. And then when I hit the next page, because I wanted to go to the sermons page, did the same thing. Back to the server, I want the sermons page, sends it back. And it does that every single time that you want something. And then sometimes it will dynamically cache things, so modern devices modern browsers guess which page you'll want to go to next. And so it might actually pull that page before you ask for it, so that if you click on it, it'll just show it to you immediately. And that allows the internet to speed up. And then if you go somewhere else, it eventually clears that cache, not usually right away. That's called a cache, C-A-C-H-E. So the domain name service does this. But because it is that intermediary, it is also able to function very, very well to block domains. So if you are registered, if you've got a registration, say, with Cloudflare or with OpenDNS or with any of these other domain name systems, and you tell them, I do not want anything from this particular web address, it's one thing just to say, I don't want anything from legacybaptistchurch.net. But we've got a Nextcloud server at mylegacy.legacybaptistchurch.net. Well, that's not www.legacybaptistchurch.net. That's www.mylegacy.legacybaptistchurch.net. That's we call that a subdomain, but not all filters actually effectively filter out subdomains. However, if you do it at the top domain name level, because I have to go through legacybaptistchurch.net to get to that subdomain, it'll say block it all. So DNS servers are the most thorough way to be able to block an entire server, an entire domain name off. And so it goes to the domain name system or the domain name service. And then it goes to, as we've said, the actual server. So domain name system translates human-readable domain names, www.whatever.com, to a numerical IP address, internet protocol address. They also help route traffic to appropriate servers. They form lines of barriers of protection, and they can act as a filtering service. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Then, of course, it goes to the server, and that server sends back the information. Again, this is the wrong arrow here. It should go back this way through, of course, the infrastructure. And so that is the model. That is how the internet effectively functions on a very basic level. Are there any questions about kind of this nitty-gritty stuff? Yes?
So when you're talking about internet service providers, that's talking about like Google, that's talking about like Mozilla Firefox, or who exactly in a dummy 101 for William,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very technical. Who is internet? Who does that
Great question. That would not be, well, Google is one, but that would not be like a Google or a Firefox. Those would be software, browsers. The internet service providers would be AT&T, Verizon, Xfinity, Comcast, any fiber optic telecom, the telecoms effectively. Would be your internet service providers. Now, Google does have its own ISP called Google Fi, and it's its own phone carrier. So Google does have one, but it's not Google itself. It's the subsidiary that is Google Fi, that is their internet service provider. And then Starlink is also an internet service provider. Elon Musk's Starlink is a satellite internet service provider. So there are actually a great deal of them that exist. And they have their own infrastructure to bring the capacity, the infrastructure to people. Thus, to be able to, it's the people that facilitate you getting online. In theory, nowadays municipalities they're installing their own lines and they're using it as a utility. But outside of that kind of city owning the utility sort of a thing, if you want an internet service provider to provide service to your house, they run their own lines, right? They normally, when a community is built or when they're having things installed, they'll install their lines. And then when they want to get to your house, they will trench your yard. They'll put a line to your box, and they'll install their own line, an ingress point, so that they can connect to their modem. If you switch services, their lines are unused now under your house. They still have their main line that goes to all of the houses, right, at a kind of a switch, we'd call them. But yeah, those would be the internet service providers. And mobile internet service providers are primarily T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. All of the other ones are what's called MNVOs. I don't recall what that stands for. But basically, they use AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile's towers, and they rent those towers from them to get service. And because they rent it in bulk, they can oftentimes offer those services for less. A lot of what you're paying for when you pay for AT&T, Verizon, sometimes it's more data, and sometimes it's a lot of it like the perks, like they give you a free subscription to this or that if you do their thing, and then you're paying for their big customer service, their stores. So you're paying a very high price because they have all of the stores and the phone stock and the employees that they have to pay. But if you're just some guy, that's got a little cell company and you've only got a warehouse where you have some phones and where you do customer service, your overhead is much less. So you can charge less even though you're still using AT&T and Verizon's towers for your network. And so those are still internet service providers, but actually they're not. You're still, if anything, you're being routed through AT&T's tower to their servers, at which point then, if they have any special features, filters or whatnot, they can apply them there. It's basically just pointing them to a different DNS, which is that company's DNS. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, I think, let me see. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop there for this week. We'll just finish a little early this week. Next week we've got the baptism, so we're not going to have class. And then the week after that, we'll start walking through these because I want to maybe put a little more thought into just demonstrating some of these things rather than just talking about them. Yeah, this is the point where we need to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, and actually start talking through. I'll give you examples, and what I'll do is I'll show you on my devices some of the examples. I'll probably take some screenshots of what I've got at home as well, or a video, and show you some examples of what this looks like, how I set it up. At home, I've got a free open source router firewall called pfSense, and they have with a lot of open source software, what happens is they've got a business clientele that they sell support to, and then they give that the same software that they sell support to for businesses, or if you have a certain number of computers, you have to buy it, but they give it to individual users for free, and we become their beta testers. So they give stuff to us a little bit before they give it to the business folks, and if it goofs up, when I install the update, if it goofs up, then they don't send it to their business folks that are actually paying. And so I become a bit of a beta tester for them, but in doing so, I get good, you can get good software for free because you are providing them a different sort of a service and obviously it goes through a lot of things before it gets to you. It's only on a rare occasion where something goofs up. So I can show you pfSense and how that works. I can show you what I've got on my phone, which is a little bit more technical, but I've got a little bit more of a technical solution specifically because it costs me a lot less money. Whereas the simple solutions are a lot more money. And then if nothing else, though, it'll give you a feel for that. And then you can start to go home and you can fiddle with what you have. And I'll talk to you about how to log into your router at home, or where to go if you want to buy one that can do the job for you. And then if you run into any snags, of course, I'd be happy to come by your house and help you through those snags and get things going for you if you run into some issues there. And then I'm going to be talking from the world of Android. Things are a little bit less flexible in the world of iPhone because the iPhone doesn't give as much access to the lower parts of the operating system. It does not allow you to install custom certificates, which is important for certain elements of filtering. But iPhones still do have plenty there for your typical person. Again, it's only the more technical people where getting down in those extra layers becomes a bit more advantageous. So we'll talk through some of those things. We'll talk, and then after we talk through the technical stuff, then we'll get into accountability and spiritual preparedness, and make sure that we don't get so lost in all the technical that we forget the fact that all of this is only to protect us so that then we can establish our hearts in obedience and loyalty to the Lord and self-control, temperance. Okay, good.